Okay, so guys, welcome to today's reading. But before we continue reading our book, I saw something on my WhatsApp on someone's WhatsApp status. Like my friend posted it. It's a small write-up by someone by Nikki Banners, and I would just love to share it with you. I would love to read it with you. Write-up said, "How I changed my life." Yeah. So I started reading books. So that's what it's all about. I saw it, I love it, it resonates with me. It made me think of my life like, okay, yeah, am I really doing this? It makes me think of myself like, what can I relate to this? Is this also me making progress? It makes me evaluate what I am doing and why I am doing it, and if I am conscious of whatever I am doing as it should be. So now let me read it to you also. I don't know if you might have come across this also, and you might also, it might be useful for you. It is not even like might. This will be very, very useful for you because when I read it and you see what it's all about, you want to also benefit from it the way I have benefited from it. So now let me read it. How I changed my life. I started reading books and quotes that inspired me to be better or that helped me learn new things. I started changing my circle. Of course, that was what caught my attention. I started reading books that inspired me to be better, which is what we are doing. As I told you all, I didn't just start this YouTube channel. I didn't just select this niche because I want to. I selected it because I find out that, okay, reading self-help books is something that would help change my life, that will help me grow, that will make me a better version of myself. But then I fancy reading more of fantasy books, which was why I started this channel. So it will help me. If I'm reading it to you guys, I'm also reading it to myself, and it gives me a sense of responsibility that, okay, yes, I have to read this because it is necessary and compulsory for me to read it. So which is why I started reading this. So it will be easier for me to be able to read self-help books. I know that, okay, yes, this is vital to my development as a person. This is vital to my progress and everything about my life. So now, reading on, she said, I started changing my circle. I began spending more time with people who inspired me, people who are kind, people who lift me higher, and people who I can help lift too. You know, this life is not all about just receiving, it's about giving and receiving. That's what life is all about. When you give, you also receive. When you receive, you give out also. That's what makes you full and be able to get new things into yourself. People who I can uplift too. I started spending more time alone, working on myself rather than with people who drained or discouraged me. When you are in the midst of people who all they do is talk, it's about you, remove yourself from that circle. That circle is not where you can grow. Break free from it. I began unfollowing everyone online who didn't bring me joy, inspiration, or growth. Instead, I followed people who I wanted to become more like and people who inspired me in some way. I changed my mindset on fitness and training from I have to do this too. I get to do this. And I genuinely love seeing how capable my body is. I started listening to my heart even when everyone around me had a different opinion. I began believing in myself no matter what. I began believing in myself no matter what. This is by Nikki Banners. Do you believe in yourself? Ask yourself that question. Do I believe in myself? Do I believe I can do this? I can do that. Do I believe I can do anything I put my mind to? Do you believe in yourself? If you don't believe in yourself, start believing in yourself. Please and please and please start believing in yourself. So now that's the little gifts I have for you for today. So now we'll be moving on into exactly what we're supposed to do today. Like, so we remember where we stopped the last time. We stopped at never enough, the chapter 3, never enough. So the never enough, it was all about rich people not having enough mindset. They want more and more and more, and at the end of the day they hurt themselves with it. So everyone should have a enough mindset, like, okay, know when to stop, know when it is enough, and what the book said. So now chapter 4, we're moving on to chapter 4, which said confounding, compounding, confounding, compounding. This chapter 4, we won't be reading it like from the book word to word. all we're doing is a summary of it, summarizing, because it's more like an explanation of something. So let me first read what was under the chapter title. It says $81.5 billion. Warren Buffett's $84.5 billion net worth came after his 55th birthday. Our minds are not built to handle such absurdities, honestly. It came after his 65th birthday. Wow. Moving on into the chapter. Lessons from one field can teach us something important about unrelated fields. Take the billion-year history of ice ages and what it teaches about growing money. Of course, the story that comes after is a story of how the earth is younger than how we think it is, how understanding how the world works affects us, the ice age history in essence. So it says it was not until the 19th century that scientists agreed that the earth had on multiple occasions been covered in ice. There was too much evidence to argue otherwise. The amount of energy needed to freeze the planet, melt it anew, and freeze it over yet again is staggering. What on earth, that's literally speaking, could be causing these cycles? It must be the most powerful force on our planet. And it was not just in the way anyone expected. There were plenty of theories about why ice ages occurred to account for their animals' geological influences. It begins when a summer never gets warm enough to melt the previous winter's snow. The leftover ice base makes it easier for snow to accumulate the following winter, which increases the odds of snow sticking around in the following summer, which attracts even more accumulation the following winter. But perpetual snow reflects more of the sun's ray, which excavates cooling, which brings more snowfall, and so on. Within a few hundred years, a seasonal snowpack grows into a continental ice sheet, and you are off to the races. And this same thing happens in reverse. So now, while you are reading this, I want you to know that the author is giving us the story of how the history of the iceberg, just in relation, so it could be related to how money works. So I want you to just follow through, and we'll see how this relates with money. The amazing thing here is how big something can grow from a relatively small change in conditions. You start with a thin layer of snow left over from a cool summer that no one would think anything of, and then in a geological blink of an eye, the entire earth is covered in miles thick ice. As glaciologists Gwen puts it, it is not necessarily the amount of snow that causes ice sheets, but the fact that snow, however little, lasts. The big takeaway from ice ages is that you don't need tremendous force to create tremendous results. If something compounds, if a little, that's like, if something compounds, that's like, if a little growth serves as a food for future growth, a small starting base can lead to results so extraordinary they seem to defy logic. It can be so logic defying that you underestimate what's possible, where growth comes from, and where it can lead to. So it is with money. That's how it relates with money. Now, moving on, more than 2,000 books are dedicated to how Warren built his fortune. Many of them are wonderful, but few pay attention to the simplest fact, which is his fortune isn't due to just being a good investor, but being a good investor since he was literally a child. So, as I write this, Warren's net worth is $84.5 billion. Of that $84.5 billion, it's 4.2 billion was accumulated after his 50th birthday. $81.5 billion came after came after he qualified for Social Security in his mid 60s. So Warren is a phenomenal investor, but you miss a key point if you attach all his success to investing acumen. The real key to his success is that he's been an investor for 3 quarters of a century. And he started investing in his 30s and retired in his 60s. Few people would have ever heard of him. So let's consider a little thought experiment. Buffett began serious investing when he was 10 years old. By the time he was 30, he had a net worth of $1 million or $9.3 million adjusted for inflation. What if he was a normal person, spending his teens and 20s exploring the world and finding his passion? And by age 30, his net worth, say, let's say $25,000. And let's say it still went on to earn the extraordinary annual investment returns it has been able to generate, that's like 22% annually, but quit investing and retired at age 60 to play golf and spend time with his grandkids. What would a rough estimate of his net worth be today? That it is not $84.5 billion, it will be $11.9 million. That's like 99.9% less than his actual net worth. Effectively, all of Warren's financial success can be tied to the financial base he built in his pubescent years and the longevity he maintained in his geriatric years. His skill is investing, but his secret is time. That's how compounding works. Think of this in another way. He is the richest investor of all time, but he is not actually the greatest, at least not when measured by average annual returns. Jim, head of the hedge fund Renaissance Technologies, has compounded money at 66% annually since 1988. No one comes close to this record. As we just saw, Warren has compounded at roughly 22% annually. Jim's net worth, as I write, is $21 billion. He is, and I know how ridiculous this sounds given the numbers we are dealing with, but he is 75% less rich than Warren. Why the difference? If Jim is such a better investor, because Jim did not find his investment stride until he was 50 years old. He has had half as many years to compound as Warren. If Jim had earned his 66% annual returns for the 70-year span Warren has built his wealth, it would be worth, please hold your breath, 63 quintillion, 900 quadrillion, 781 trillion, 780 billion, 748,160,000 dollars. Okay, 63 quintillion, 900 quadrillion, 781 trillion, 780 billion, 748,160,000 dollars. Please, if you can write out this number, write it in the comment section. I want to see how you write it. If you can write out this in numbers, write it and put it in the comment section. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Let's see who will be able to write it out for us. So moving on, reading on. These are ridiculous impractical numbers. Okay. The point is that what seem like small changes in growth assumptions can lead to ridiculous impractical numbers. And so, when we are studying why something got to become as powerful as it has, why an ice age formed, or why Warren is so rich, we often overlook the key drivers of success. I have heard many people say the first time they saw a compound interest table, or one of those stories about how much more you had have for retirement if you began saving in your 20s versus your 30s, changed their life, but it probably didn't. What it likely did was surprise them because the result intuitively didn't seem right. Linear thinking is so much more intuitive than exponential thinking. If I ask you to calculate 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8 in your head, you can do it in a few seconds and tell me it's 72. And if I ask you to calculate 8 times 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, your head will explode. Here is that when compounding isn't intuitive, we often ignore its potential and focus on solving problems through other means. Not because we are overthinking, but because we rarely stop to consider compounding potential. None of the 2000 books picking apart perfect success are titled, "This guy has been investing consistently for three-quarter of a century," but we know that is the key to the majority of his success. It's just hard to wrap your head around that math because it's not intuitive. There are books on economic cycles, trading strategies, and sector bets, but the most powerful and important book should be called Shut Up and Wait. It's just one page with a long-term chart of economic growth. The practical takeaway is that the counterintuitiveness of compounding may be responsible for the majority of disappointing trades, bad strategies, and successful investing attempts. You can't blame people for devoting all their efforts, efforts in what they learn and what they do, to trying to earn the highest investment returns. It intuitively seems like the best way to get rich. But good investing isn't necessarily about earning the highest returns because the highest returns tends to be one of it that can't be repeated. It's about any pretty good returns that you can stick with and which can be repeated for the longest period of time. Then that's when compounding runs wild. The opposite of this, any huge returns that can't be held onto, leads to some tragic stories. We will need the next chapter to tell them. Moving on to the next chapter, chapter 5, which says getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. Good investing is not necessarily about making good decisions, it's about consistently not screwing up. Read with me. There are a million ways to get wealthy and plenty of books on how to do so. But there is only one way to stay wealthy, some combination of frugality and paranoia. That's a topic we don't discuss often. Let's begin with a quick story about two investors, neither of whom knew one another, but whose paths crossed in an interesting way almost a century ago. Livermore was the greatest stock market trader of his day. Born in 1877, he became a professional trader before most people knew you could do such a thing. By age 30, he was worth the inflation adjusted equivalent of $100 million. By 1919, Jess Livermore was already one of the most well-known investors in the world. The stock market crash that year that ushered in the Great Depression cemented his legacy in history. More than a third of the stock market value was wiped out in an October 1929 week, whose days were later named Black Monday, Black Tuesday, and Black Thursday. Livermore's wife, Dorothy, feared the worst when her husband returned home on October 29. Reports of war speculators committing suicide were spreading across New York. She and her children greeted Jess at the door in tears, while her mother was so distraught she hid in her room, screaming. Jess, according to biographer Tom Robinson, stood confused for a few moments before realizing what was happening. He then broke the news to his family. In a stroke of genius and luck, he had been short the market, betting stocks would decline. You mean we are not ruined? Dorothy asked. No, darling. I have just had my best ever trading day. We are fabulously rich and we can do whatever we like, Jess said. Dorothy ran to her mother and told her to be quiet. In one day, Jess Livermore made equivalent of more than $3 billion. During one of the worst months in the history of the stock market, he became one of the richest men in the world. As Livermore's family celebrated their unfathomable success, another man wandered the streets of New York in desperation. Abraham Jamansky was a multimillionaire real estate developer who made a fortune during the roaring 1920s. As the economy boomed, he did what virtually every other successful New Yorker did in the late 1920s, bet heavily on the surging stock market. On October 26, 1929, the New York Times published an article that in two paragraphs portrayed a tragic ending. Bernard H. Sandler, attorney of 225 Broadway, was asked yesterday morning by Mrs. Abraham Jamansky of Mount Vernon to help find her husband missing since Thursday morning. Jamansky, who is 50 years old and an East real estate operator, was said by Sandler to have invested heavily in stocks. Sandler said he was told by Mrs. Jamansky that a friend saw her husband late Thursday 001 Wall Street near the stock exchange. According to her informant, her husband was tearing a strip of ticker tape into bits and scattering it on the sidewalk as he walked towards Broadway. And that, as far as we know, was the end of Abraham Jamansky. Here we have a contrast. The October 1929 crash made Jess Livermore one of the richest men in the world. It ruined Abraham Jamansky, perhaps taking his life. But fast forward 4 years and the stories cross paths again. After his 1929 blowout, Livermore, overflowing with confidence, made larger and larger bets. He wound up far over his head, increasing amounts of debt, and eventually lost everything in the stock market. Broke and ashamed, he disappeared for 2 days in 1933. His wife set out to find him, Jess Livermore, the stock market operator of 100 Park Avenue missing and has not been seen since 3 p.m. yesterday. The New York Times wrote in 1933. He returned, but his path was set. Livermore eventually took his own life. The timing was different, but Jamansky and Livermore shared a character trait, which is they were both very good at getting wealthy, but and equally bad at staying wealthy. Even if wealthy is not a word you had applied to yourself, the lessons from that observation apply to everyone at all income levels. Getting money is one thing, keeping it is another. Put that in mind. Getting money is one thing, keeping it is another. So now, if I had to summarize money survivor in a single word, it would be survivor. As we will see in chapter 6, 40% of companies successful enough to become publicly traded lost effectively all of their value over time. The Forbes 400 list of richest Americans has on average roughly 20% turnover per decade for courses that don't have to do with debts or transferring money to another family member. Capitalism is hard. Part of the reason this happens is because getting money and keeping money are two different skills. Getting money requires taking risks, being optimistic, and putting yourself out there. But keeping money requires the opposite of taking risks. It requires humility and fear that what you've made can be taken away from you just as fast. It requires frugality and an acceptance that at least some of what you've made is attributable to luck. So past success can be relied upon to repeat indefinitely. Michael Mortis, the millionaire head of Sequel Capital, was asked by Charlie Rose why Sequel was so successful. Mortis mentioned longevity, noting that some VC firms succeed for 5 or 10 years, but Sequel has prospered for 4 decades. Rose asked why that was. Mortis said, I think we've always been afraid of going out of business. Rose said, really? So it is fear. Only the paranoid survive. Marty said there is a lot of truth to that. We assume that tomorrow won't be like yesterday. We can't afford to rest on our laurels. We can't be complacent. We can't assume that yesterday's success translates into tomorrow's good fortune. Here again, survivor. Not growth or brains or insight, the ability to think around for a long time without being wiped out or being forced to is what makes the biggest difference. This should be the cornerstone of your strategy. Whether it is investing or your career or business you own, there are two reasons why a survival mentality is key with money. One is the obvious. Few gains are so great that they are worth wiping yourself out over. The other, as we saw in chapter 4, is the counterintuitive math of compounding. Compounding only works if you give an asset years and years to grow. It's like planting oak trees. A year of growth will never show much progress. 10 years can make a meaningful difference, and 50 years can create something absolutely extraordinary. But getting and keeping that extraordinary growth requires surviving all the unpredictable ups and downs that everyone inevitably experiences over time. We can spend years trying to figure out how Warren achieved his investment returns, how he found the best companies, the cheapest stocks, the best managers. That's hard. Less hard but equally important is pointing out what he didn't do. He didn't get carried away with debt. He didn't panic and sell during the 14 recessions he lived through. He didn't sully his business reputation. He didn't attach himself to one strategy, one worldview, or one passing trend. He didn't rely on others' money. That's like managing investment through a public company, which meant investors couldn't withdraw their capital. He didn't burn himself out and quit or retire. He survived. Survival gave him longevity, and longevity, investing consistently from age 10 to at least age 89, is what made compounding work wonders. That single point is what matters most when describing his success. To show you what I mean, you have to hear the story of Rick. You've likely heard of the investing duo of Warren and Charlie Munger, but 40 years ago, there was a third member of the group, Rick Warren. Warren, Charlie, and Rick made investments together and and interviewed business managers together. Then Rick kind of disappeared, at least relative to Buffett and Munger's success. Investors Monish Pabran once asked him what happened to Rick. Manish recalled that Warren said, Charlie and I always knew that we would become incredibly wealthy. We were not in a hurry to get wealthy. We knew it would happen. Rick was just as smart as us, but he was in a hurry. What happened was that in 1973 to 1974 downturn, Rick was levered with margin loans, and the stock market went down almost 70% in those 2 years, and he got margin calls. He sold his Berkshire stock to Warren actually said, I bought Rick's Berkshire stock at under $4 a piece. Rick was forced to sell because it was levered. Charlie, Warren, and Rick were equally skilled at getting wealthy, but Warren and Charlie had the added skill of staying wealthy, which over time is the skill that matters most. Nassim Taleb put it this way: having an edge and surviving are two different things. The first requires the second. You need to avoid ruin at all costs. So I guess we'll be stopping here for today. Although I'm enjoying this, I wish I can continue reading. Or should we just continue reading? Okay, let's just take like maybe one more from this before we call it a day. So applying the survival mindset to the real world comes down to appreciating three things. Let me list them out. One, more than I want big returns, I want to be financially unbreakable. And if I am unbreakable, I actually think I will get the biggest returns because I'll be able to stick around long enough for compounding to work wonders. Then two, planning is important, but the most important part of every plan is to plan on the plan, not going according to the plan. Planning is important, but the most important plan of the plan is to plan on the plan, not going according to the plan, which means have a plan B. Number three, barbelled personality. Optimistic about the future and paranoid about what would prevent you from getting to the future is vital. So, getting wealthy versus staying wealthy, learn it. Being wealthy is something different, and staying wealthy is another different thing entirely, and it's a skill. Thank you for joining me for reading today. Do well to subscribe, comment, tell me your favorite quotes that you've heard so far while reading this book. Tell me what exactly has resonated with you the most in the comment section. Engage. Let me hear from you. Okay. So thank you so much for reading this with me. See you at our next reading where we'll be diving into the chapter 6 of this. Bye. Take care of yourself and be good. Stay good.